We all have a story to tell, and writing is such a great avenue to use to express the stories that lie deep within you. In today's episode, I'm joined by Janelle Hardy, and Janelle has all kinds of incredible tips and suggestions on how we can use writing as a way to not only tell our story, but support us in revealing the untold stories that lie within us so that we can find deeper expression and healing and transformation and alchemy through the writing process. She's someone who really believes in the power of using mythology in storytelling to support us to connect more with our experiences and how these myths, how these fairy tales, how these stories have so much to teach us when we actually tune in to use them as a tool to listen to what's happening for us. And she's got also some great prompts on how to guide us into not only working with resistance, but working more with our body to find ways to access the expression of what lies within. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. I am definitely excited to do some writing after speaking to Janelle, so enjoy. So, something that I incorporate into my explorations is movement. Movement because of my Feldenkrais background, but also I love dancing. I love being guided in a dancing process. And I dabble into writing. I don't in any way call myself a writer, but I really love putting words to what it is I'm experiencing. So I'm really excited to have you, Janelle, here, Janelle Hardy, because you are well versed in the writing world and in the moving world. And I know you also really see the benefit of using movement, dance, writing to support a deepening of a sense of self. And I want to invite people listening into also discovering the power of movement and more writing in today's episode, but the power of using writing to get to know ourselves more and understand more of our story and the many different stories that exist within us. So thank you for joining.
It's my pleasure.
Uh, I want to actually start off with more of an experiential piece, and because I love to weave the audience into our conversation. What I'd love to invite us all to do is to notice what shows up at the idea of dancing. Now, at the idea of just dancing, what shows up? This is a great way just to notice what we experience about ourselves in relationship to a word or an action, an idea of something. And I'll go first. And Janelle, I'd love to know what shows up for you. And we'll do the same thing for writing as well. So it's interesting right now in this moment when I think about dancing, I actually feel like almost like a uprising of energy and like, yes, we've been waiting for this. It's actually been some time since I've danced. And I can feel this like, yeah, this energy that wants to unleash and move and be in expression through movement with the support of music, which I find can be so helpful. Well, I'm also noticing a heaviness on top of that of just like, yeah, I want to, there's this heaviness, there's this sluggishness. And even as I'm talking about it, I can feel myself slouching a little bit more. I'm moving more into dorsal, heavier, slower qualities. My voice is different. So I'm aware of these two dynamics in relationship to the idea of dancing. And why I find that helpful to do is it just gives me information about myself of these two dynamics that are at play. The part of me that feels so deep, that wants to move and be in expression, and the other breaking system that has a challenge with making that happen.
hmm
You want to share what you experience in relationship to the idea of dancing?
Yes. So this is the context of how I'm thinking about dancing is a hot, sweaty, dark dance floor with loud music. And in that context where everyone is in the flow, just pure joy and freedom.
Mm. How do you notice the pure joy and freedom?
Um, so there's a caveat. I have menstrual cramps, which are speaking loudly at this moment. So
Uh-huh.
come on, guys. Play a little bit, but um it's the noticing a feeling of pure joy and freedom at the idea of dancing in that sort of space is um that I feel less energy behind and around my eyes and in my head,
Mm,
the freedom
beautiful.
from thought.
Yeah,
And a lot more feeling of aliveness in my legs, feet, ankles, just kind of a sparkly spaciousness.
cool. I love that you also painted a picture to support the experience. And I think that's something I want to name, especially as we shift into the explorations with writing. It's like a word alone can bring on an experience. And then when you paint the picture and you create a scene, it can bring on a very different experience, or it can support the experience to take even more shape. And I love that you did that because I want to weave that into our conversation around writing too, the importance of, laying out the groundwork, creating the scene to support deeper unfolding to happen.
Yeah, and there's um I especially name that because we live in cultures and societies that don't encourage dancing for dancing's sake anymore. I have a master's degree in dance, and that's like all I studied was the cultural connections to dance. And the truth of the matter is, we all dance before we even walk. Our bodies respond to rhythm and movement before we're able to even move our legs and stand on our feet. So our birthright is being responsive to movement and dancing without self-consciousness, without any ideas of professionalism as a way of connection, both to ourselves, to music, to the environment, and to people. And that's really been erased from our societies and spaces to the point where a lot of people constrict around the idea of dancing, feel they aren't a good dancer, feel too inhibited to be able to step into the flow of how our bodies simply want to and are able to respond. And those are cultural constructions that then
Mhm.
translate into nervous system responses. But under all of that is the truth that our bodies will simply move in a dancing fashion if everything else is taken away. All the limits that are applied by our own beliefs and our cultural values are stripped away. Our bodies want to dance.
Yes. Yeah. They want to be an expression, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, to respond to the rhythm of the beat of whatever is happening around us, whether it's a simple beat or an
Yeah.
intense, angled, yeah, there's so much there. And I feel like the same could go for writing or storytelling, really, right? That the storytelling is such a deep part of who we are as well, to pass
Mhm.
down story, to pass down tradition, to pass down knowledge, and that too has been impacted by our culture and yeah, the many entanglements and dynamics that can show up around writing. So for me, if I do the same exercise with the idea of writing, I instantly feel my throat tightening. I feel a nervousness. My heartbeat increases a little. There's a little bit, there's a lot of resistance. It's like something that I have been well aware of since, oh, probably being a teenager. Is like someone's going to write it or read it, So there's all this fear there. There's it has to be perfect. There's all kinds of things entangled in writing for me. Um, and I still enjoy writing, but I can feel that present while I'm writing or even at the idea of writing. And yeah, it's rooted in so much history that
Yeah.
it impacts my ability to find my words, to express myself, to tell my story, to share my perspective. It's definitely something that I'm curious about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to invite others to also consider what's there for writing, around writing. Like, can you become more familiar with what's entangled? What is your experience? What shows up at the idea of writing? Or if you could sit down and grab a pen, which we'll invite you to do later on in the conversation with a few prompts, right? Like, what happens? There's so much there that we can learn about ourselves through that.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I teach writing and I still start with the foundation of story.
mm,
Because writing is a really recent technology in terms of being widespread. But story and storytelling is tens of thousands of years old.
mm, mm, yeah. So how would you start with story versus starting with writing? What do you mean by that?
Well, so specifically with memoir writing, which is what I teach, healing combined with memoir writing. I start people when they take my course by choosing an ancient tale, which my definition of that is fairly broad. It's a story that comes from oral history tradition that is older than a human life. So,
Mm,
fairy tale, myth, fable, family lore, community lore, religious stories are quite ancient. Um, any story that comes out of a verbal oral tradition and has been passed down has some kind of archetypal and narrative power and energy. And if we resonate with a story, which can mean you really like it, but it can also mean you don't. You have a
mm,
charge in the opposite, like, oh, I hate that story. Right? Either direction, it's a clue. There's something in the story that wants to connect with you and guide you and teach you. And so that's the actual starting point with memoir writing for me is choosing an ancient tale and building a relationship with it and engaging with it from a more animist perspective where um, we give we give the story its agency.
mm,
We allow the story in our belief systems to be alive and to have a desire to be in connection with us as much as we want to be in connection with it. So we can get out of our own way a little and be supported by this story that has a lot of wisdom and delight to offer us if we choose to build a relationship with it. And even very simple, small fairy tales, once we start working with them in this fashion, suddenly become immense,
mm,
rich, full of guidance and insight for our body psyche. And by starting in that fashion with story, we're kind of apprenticing ourselves to the art of story and storytelling. And then out of that, writing is just one medium of many in which we can choose to bring our stories forth into the world in order to offer to others. So I'm working with writing, but you can do that with visual arts, with movement arts, theater, dance, music, whatever it is, with the absolutely ephemeral arts that are intended to be erased. It actually doesn't matter how we bring story forth into the world as long as we do. And
mhm,
then with writing, which is how we're all so well trained to communicate visually through writing and reading. Even that, if you think about getting a story on paper, that's not the end point. Because
mm,
often stories that resonate start to be told verbally by others. Oh, hey, you should read this book. It's so amazing. And here's why, blah, blah, blah. They're starting to tell your story to friends,
yes.
um, get taken and turned into film, into TV. Like story wants to move through our lives, and we get to choose how to shape our own story and then move it into writing. And I'll make the case that writing, because our society is very invested in material evidence and writing, uh, and we have histories that are one-sided, that often don't include women, that often don't include marginalized people. It's actually important to get our stories published,
Mm.
written and published, because they end up in archives.
Mm.
I worked at an archives for a year, and the amount of research and resources that an archive offers people in later generations is quite extraordinary. And so that's just like, let's do it, you guys.
Yeah.
Let's start with story, but also do the writing so that other people can benefit from our experiences.
Yeah. It makes me think about my grandparents or even my lineage, how much I would love to know more. And had they written their story, I'd
Yeah.
get to know more, and how knowing more then also gets to support me in understanding myself.
Mhm.
So I really see how that would be such a rich thing to have us do, to have us all write our memoirs.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also because we both work with trauma, one of the devastating effects of trauma that's not supported and healed is that people stop telling their stories because it's too painful. And then you have these breaks in family and community and cultural lines where all the stories vanish because it's too hard when something truly terrible has happened, um, to revisit and pass that on. And then the next two, three, four generations are left with this kind of orphaned longing for belonging through story that's absent.
Yeah, so true. And what stands out to me in that is the importance of learning how to tell your story, even from an experiential perspective, a little bit more, where it's not so much about what happened to me, but more what am I experiencing? So even in when I think about writing and there's this resistance that shows up, for me to even share the resistance is me sharing,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't have to be me talking about my history and what happened to me that caused the
Yes.
resistance. It's more like, well, I'm noticing this, and I'm noticing resistance in my muscle tone and in the way I'm holding my pen. And that already paints a picture for someone to either relate to or, create their own story from. So
Mhm.
I'm really curious on how, being more knowledgeable in trauma and being more knowledgeable from a nervous system perspective and from a somatic perspective. It's like having that guidance to guide people into telling their story from a different perspective. What do you find is valuable in that, or how do you guide people into speaking more from these perspectives? Myth and fairy tale being one way in, another way in being, speaking more from these perspectives. Anything you want to share around that?
From the perspectives of, sorry, I
Of
got lost.
more experiential. Yeah, I know I tangent
Okay.
a little
Yeah.
bit there. So there's, it's like one
Yeah.
way in is to
Yeah.
write from the perspective of fairy tale and mythology as a way in to start to find story and a relationship with story. Another way in is in, at least this is what I'm curious about, is like, how do I
Mm-hmm.
write from the experiential?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first, from a very practical perspective, a lot of writing in the English language is missing the body. We don't have a lot of vocabulary for physical experiences and sensations.
Mm.
And stories and writing reflects kind of an overcultural emphasis on rational, intellectual, logical thinking processes. So by um, starting from the body, which I always start my students with a body-based writing prompt before we get into trying to write a story, we're cultivating an ability to notice, which then cultivates an ability to name. and
Mm.
describe these experiences of being in our body, in our lives and stories, and practicing getting those descriptions onto paper so that we can actually tangibly offer listeners and readers the real experience of ourselves in our bodies rather than our ideas, right? And so
Beautiful.
bringing that in to our writing makes it more real and it makes it more interesting, I think.
Yeah, same.
And it stretches our ability to play with vocabulary when vocabulary is missing, to make up ways of describing, to play with our creativity within language and its limits.
Mhm.
The other thing I'll tie back into working with fairy tale or myth is that the way I get people working with that isn't so literal so much as, for example, a story that I've had a long relationship with is the Selkie tale, the Seal Woman tale. A lot of people are familiar with that.
Mhm.
And one idea of there's many different themes in these stories, and I have a whole free workshop that takes 2.5 hours to get you into it. So I can't explain it all right now, but you working with an ancient tale helps you identify the themes that are already at play, the mythic themes in your own life, and to choose one. So if we use the Selkie fairy tale, one way of looking at it, which Clarissa Pinkola Estes describes in her book Women Who Run with the Wolves, is that the seal woman, when she takes off her skin and takes human form with her fisherman husband, she's taken off her soul skin. She's missing a crucial part of herself, and part of her journey is to retrieve and reclaim that soul skin. So for me, that really resonated as someone who was very sensitive and overwhelmed a lot, feeling other people's experiences internally far too much. And what does it look like and feel like to reclaim my sensitivity as part of myself instead of trying to reject it because of being criticized for it? Alongside reclaiming it, also learning the skills to thrive without numbing myself, to be sensitive, but not to feel knocked over by life. And that theme, when you bring it into body experience, it's not separate, right?
Mhm.
Being sensitive, well, how does that feel inside myself?
Yeah.
Bringing my sensitivity back. And I love how seals have this beautiful fat layer of blubber and sleek fur. Like, what would it be like to take the sensitivity, these rejected parts of myself, or stolen by culture, or however you understand it in yourself, to to lay that on me and get all the tissues of that skin and fat rehydrating the rest of me in my actual lived experience and finding the words for that. And then the Selkie story is maybe still explicit in my memoir, but more likely is just a foundational underground structure of archetype and narrative. And then my description of my experiences, especially the embodied experience of reclaiming myself and being wholly myself, but not overwhelmed. That's the story.
Beautiful. I can feel like that's what stands out to me in that is I can feel the story. Like I know the story within me. So I can imagine myself reading that and being in the resonance and in the flavors of my own knowing. And that's
Mhm.
something that I'm really intrigued about with reading is how can we have our experiences and be aware of our experiences when we're reading?
Yeah.
And like you said, the English language is lacking the 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 words for a lot of these experiences, but how can we take a writing piece and masterfully weave these really important body-based experiences into what's the story that's being shared so that it's more of us is taking in the story and also helping us remember or come alive or shift out of our own limitations that might be impacted by whatever the story is
Yeah.
inviting us into discovering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So beautiful. I'm really inspired to write right now.
Good.
So you mentioned um, prompts. So I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you're willing to invite listeners into a prompt before we
Hmm.
go into another little piece here. And what I would invite listeners to do is you could even, in the juiciness that I'm feeling after hearing Janelle speak to incredible, all these incredible ways we can use writing, is pause this and take the prompt in and really be in the experience. Don't save it for later. Don't write it down and be like, yeah, I'll come back to this. But like, take a moment right now to take in this prompt and see where it takes you. So, what do you
Hmm.
got first? Janelle? What do you want to guide us into here?
Here's a simple, easy one. Working with our hands is always really generative. So I'll get you to just start by holding your hands in front of you and looking at them. And as you feel the impulse, wiggle or stretch or clench. And just notice facing your palms facing you. Just notice. And then turn your hands the other way. Our hands are like one of the parts of our body that we look at most often. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
But do we register it?
Mm-hmm.
So just let yourself register the visuals and the sensations. Let your attention really seep into these amazing parts of yourself. And then just take your hands, and if you're sitting at a table, you can trace your fingertips over the table, or also very easy, just rest your hands on your thighs and trace your fingertips up your thighs. This is kind of luscious, more so than the table, because then you get to feel the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe you're doing straight lines, maybe you're doing swirls. See if you can introduce different shapes in the tracing and a lighter or a heavier touch, and just notice. If you want to give your meaty muscles a squeeze, notice how strong your thumbs are and your fingertips. Like, we have this extraordinary sensitivity to receive sensation, but also to use these same hands and fingers and thumbs as tools to manipulate, but also to receive, to do, and also to be. It's all in our hands very vividly. And then just bring your hands, one last little thing. And these are always just invitations to experience. You can do what you please with the invitations. Just trace your fingertips on your forehead, over your face. Maybe do little taps. Wow. Notice what you notice. And then what I recommend, but with a body prompt like this, is that you then just set your timer for 5 to 15 minutes and start by flow writing. Flow writing means you try to write without stopping, even if your thoughts turn into nonsense. You write those too, and just trust that the flow of it is going to take you somewhere. And also, don't forget, handwriting is very gestural, so it's still in the body. It's much more gestural than typing. So notice how the gesture can be amplified or made smaller, but your whole body's involved in the act of writing as you write. And then, because I am a memoir writing teacher, I'm also going to add this suggestion. You always keep a little part of you watching and waiting for a story to
Mm.
arise, because often a story will come up, a memory from starting with your body. And the second that comes up, pounce on it and start to write the story. So
Mm.
5 to 15 minutes is what I recommend if you want to just pause right now and do that, and then unpause.
Beautiful. I love the importance of pouncing on the thing when it comes. Um, because I find it's so easy for us to be like, yeah, that's nothing. Or, something can come in that's like, no, don't go there. To
Mm,
actually notice the whispers and pounce on the whispers and really welcome them to take shape,
yeah.
that feels really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. To trust that's your body expressing what is ready to come into your consciousness.
Yes. Yeah. This is where I think there's so much benefit of writing, to use it as an opportunity for the unconscious experiences to take shape. I know that's been my experience, is when I let myself free flow, is that what it's
Flow,
called?
flow writing,
Flow,
automatic
flow
writing,
writing.
expressive writing, morning pages, it's all similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful what can take shape. And
Mhm.
finding access to those unconscious pieces can sometimes be challenging. And this is where creativity or art, whether it be writing or crafting or paint or whatever it is, I find it can be so helpful to really notice those subtle flavors. Um, do you have any suggestions on how to notice those subtle flavors for those that might be new to that?
Um, well, first, if you're not noticing and feeling frustrated, it's helpful to know that sometimes it takes time.
Hmm.
Sometimes it takes time of continuing to return to these gentle processes, nervous system, embodied, to the practice of bringing your attention into trying to listen to your body intelligence, to your body psyche. And sometimes it's kind of like befriending a feral cat, you know? That part of us might not fully trust
Mm-hmm.
the part of us that we believe to only be ourselves to listen.
Yeah,
And
good
so
point.
sometimes it takes a while. We have to woo our deeper somatic, intuitive selves that are not what we're familiar with. We have to woo them, entice them, and cultivate our own ability to expand our attention so that we don't just dismiss those clues. It's interesting that because I started out really disembodied and very invested in suppressing my intuition and, being paradoxically incredibly sensitive, but super numb and disconnected as a coping mechanism. And so, in retrospect, over 20 years into all of the transformation I've created in myself, it's mind-boggling to reflect on ways in which I was receiving those little whispers and actually really loud statements and voices and intuitive gut clenches and dismissing every last bit of it as not real.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Is that also happening when you're telling a story about I can't tune in? It in my experience, it was I
It
was
was all
trying
right
really hard to
there.
not listen. It was all right there,
Uh-huh.
how fascinating that I was so powerfully invested in ignoring it.
Yes. And I can relate to that with clients. I have certain clients that are like, I'm so disconnected from my body and this and that. And then you hear them talking, you're like, you're not disconnected at
Yeah.
all. It's all right there. But there's a certain relationship with it that feels too scary to
And
acknowledge or to
also
dive into.
a very powerful story they're telling themselves
Yes.
that does not allow for any other option,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah. It's the way they've learned to survive. Is like, well, if I maintain this story, if I actually am
Hmm.
disconnected from my body, then I perceive myself to be safe enough because I don't have to feel the intensity of it.
Yeah.
And same with you, where it's like, well, it's all right there, but if I ignore it enough, then, I stay within my comfort zone and what's
Yeah.
familiar, and I don't have to look outside of that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, so the cues are usually always there, just a
I
matter of
know.
acknowledging them
Yeah.
and being and having capacity to dip into it.
And having capacity. So it's also important not to beat yourself up about it.
Yeah.
I truly didn't have the capacity, and that's okay. But I was so miserable. Pain is a great motivator. My
Um,
misery was like these little cues weren't necessarily the things I was ignoring. It was, I feel so lonely all the time. I feel so disconnected. I feel like I'm not in my life. Things aren't going my way. I was so uncomfortable.
mhm.
That was the thing that kept nudging me towards seeking relief. And
Mm,
that's a beautiful thing too, if that's what it takes.
yeah. 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 The journey will unfold however it needs to
Mhm.
unfold.
Yeah.
However long it takes.
Eh.
Exactly. Ah. We can still have frustration about it.
Of course, that's
Be
part of
annoyed
it
by
too. Yeah.
it. Exactly. So I feel like you've given us a lot to ponder on already. And I know you also have a bunch of offerings that
Mhm.
I want to invite people to learn about because I feel like what you've offered us into is a really beautiful taste of the power of writing. And I can only imagine that your upcoming summit and upcoming offerings that you have and the free offerings you have are real rich opportunities for people. So anyone who is interested, what do you have for us to play
Mm.
with?
Okay, so the best way to stay up to date with what I'm offering is to get on my newsletter, which is at janellehardy.com. I love telling stories in my newsletter. I just sent out a story about participating in my first smut slam, for example. These are things that you won't necessarily see on my Instagram or my blog, but you'll get it all in my newsletter. Having said that, if you are listening before the end of September 2024, I have an online summit, which is free, called Dirty, Messy, Alive, and Embodied Memoir Writing Workshop Series with some absolutely spectacular presenters, all the way from thinking about starting writing your memoir, writing, craft of writing, completing, promoting, and working with resistance and all these tricky little things that pop up and try to stop us. That is a part of the creative path, and it's useful to just get some good tools to navigate it. So you can sign up for that through my newsletter or go to dirtymessyalive.com/registration. And then my transformational memoir writing course, The Art of Personal Myth Making, I only teach live once a year, and it starts October 29th.
Hmm.
And that's at personalmythmaking.com.
Amazing. And then you have a few freebies
I
too that you
have some
mentioned
great
before.
freebies on my
And
website.
you're
And a good starting point with that freebie, based on what we've been talking about, I have my 2.5 hour workshop called Outline Your Memoir Using Fairy Tale and Myth as Your Guide.
Mm,
So you'll just get to dive into what I was talking about with the Selkie story. That's free and on demand, and it's on my website.
amazing. I'm definitely inspired to write.
And also, you are a writer.
I
You
am.
want to claim
You know
that
what?
title.
Yeah. Thank you. I caught myself while I was saying it and I didn't name that I was catching myself saying that. But yeah, you're right. I am a writer. We're all writers. And I really enjoy the process of writing and it's been such an incredible way to get to know myself.
Yeah.
There's so much there. And yeah, there's so much that I find I can process by writing. Like
Yeah.
art and articulating what I'm experiencing is hard.
Mhm.
So being able to just bleh things out onto paper to support pieces to come together, to support articulation, it's been really helpful. It's been interesting though. I used to write newsletters. I don't know, when did I start my writing newsletters? I want to say 2007, 8, something like that. I started doing a
Mm.
blog, writing newsletters. I was teaching a lot of yoga at that time. And I loved it. The words would just come through me. And
Mm-hmm.
something has changed in the last while where the words feel like effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what that is. It's, I mean, some form of resistance, but that effort really is challenging for me in comparison to how I used to write. Like, I'll go back and read something that I wrote, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was so wise back then. Like, I don't even feel like, I feel like I've moved backwards.
Uh-huh.
And I don't, I'm really interested in the impact social media has had, the impact on, the online world has had in my creativity, the impact AI will have on my creativity.
Mm.
Um, I know I've been playing with the power of AI and writing things, and I had a lot of resistance at first because I'm like, but that's not an expression of who I am. Like, I want it to be an expression of me. I don't want some AI app to write it for me. Um, and I'm worried that AI will then impact our creativity and access to finding the expression within ourselves. Anything you have to say on that? I know you already gave all your things. I did that because we were in that realm, but I want to keep the conversation going a little bit longer if that's okay around
Course.
this.
I haven't used AI much, uh, but I came across a couple interesting people who helped me understand it a little differently. First off, I mean, the ship has kind of sailed, but AI, especially with visual arts, or with any kind of creative output, is actually based on the theft of artists' work who are being
Mhm.
unpaid. The foundation of all of these AI programs is sourced from human creativity, but without permission or compensation. And I don't know how the industry is going to navigate that or if it ever will. But our world is very complex, and it's important to name that complexity. The other thing that I learned that I found really interesting was um, things like ChatGPT can be used as brainstorming tools, which I
Mhm.
hadn't fully understood. And that you can also, if you're strategic and skilled with it, set up like a brain where you train it only with your own output and your own material so that what's being sourced and offered to you through the prompts is actually really truly coming from you if you take the time to enter in your own writing and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
All of that's really interesting. And what I know is that every time there's a new technology, humans have this fear that something is going to be taken away. And sometimes um, the fears are grounded in change is happening. And what if we lose the essential humanness of how we're now interacting with these technologies? We also have proof over the last 100 and some years that humans are creative, and we use tools to generate new forms of creativity we could have never imagined before.
Totally.
And here's the one thing I'll say. It's important that we don't drop the process, the difficult process. So I am never not going to write my own work, and I'm never going to encourage my students in my memoir writing classes to use AI for the first draft stage, which is what I focus on, because the healing, the transformational, the alchemical act of working with these stories comes from us grappling internally with our bodies, with our stories, with our desire to change a narrative and offer a narrative forward. And we can't outsource that to something else. We actually have to do that inner work through the medium that we choose, which is writing. And so if we skip that, we rob ourselves of that opportunity. And so that's useful to always remember, am I robbing myself by not putting myself through a process? That's quite difficult.
Hmm. Yeah. So hopefully we maintain the willingness to get uncomfortable, to explore the expression of ourselves, and to see the benefit of creativity and the impact it can have.
Yeah. And then
Well,
these tools for marketing,
yeah,
yes,
are great.
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I feel like as humans, we will want to continue to evolve and be in our expression of ourselves or explore the expression of ourselves. And well, I shouldn't speak for everyone because, we're all in different paths and different
Hmm.
places. But I feel like for the most part, there's a longing to know self, and there's the longing for connection and the longing for
Hmm.
collaboration, and that has to come from creativity and connection. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't feel like we'll lose it, but sometimes I'm like, oh, where did it go for me? But
Yeah. And actually, just one last little thing, like you spoke about how writing used to flow really freely, and now it's feeling kind of hard, sluggish. Um, Sometimes that's a reflection of uh, timing, depending on
Thank you
what
for
you're
naming.
working on.
Yeah.
I know a professional writer, she writes young adult books, but she's talked about how her career is long enough. She has the context to say this story took 20 years from start to finish. This story took
Mhm.
3 weeks. It just didn't stop pouring out of me everywhere all the time.
Huh.
And so we don't get to control the timing of what we're working with, but it can often feel really difficult if we want it to be faster than it actually needs to be. But something in the story is waiting for either us to reach a developmental stage that we're not in that will change how we interact with the story, or all these different variables. But it's important to be kind to ourselves and go, maybe the timing and the pace is out of my hands, and I need to honor the fact that it's slow. And at some point, I'll get back into the flow, but the slowness is part of the process too.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you for naming that. Yeah, love it. That'll, I already feel a little more grace for myself around
Good.
it. Anything else you want to speak to or share or
This
name?
is so rich. I can't think of anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I want to listen to it again and drop in from a listening perspective where I can
Mhm.
really welcome what to me feels often like there's so much to be shared. It's like right there. I just
Yeah.
have to welcome the gates to open to have it come out. That's what it often feels like to me. Even though I mentioned that sometimes I feel like it doesn't flow, it
Mhm.
feels like in the right context,
Right.
it's like there's so much that wants to be shared. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. It's so great to be sharing aspects of this journey with you. It's been really fun.
Yes. Total
Yeah.
pleasure on my part too.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Janelle. And hopefully, those listening, you are as inspired as I am to grab a pen and see what evolves from the other side of the ink. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this episode has provided you with new perspectives and insights. And if you haven't already, head to my website to download the experiential guide. Until the next time, I invite you to continue to pause and notice.